So Ken, let me go to you first of all. A lot of talk about democratization of the markets. Is that an economic good? Is that something we want to pursue? Is democratization of the markets?
Well, I think it is an economic good as long as it goes with, transparency. I don't think there are any clear villains in this, by the way, but my main concern would be for some, poor trader who put all their money into this as it's a bubble. What else can you call it? Is it was going up and then lost it all when it popped. It can happen a lot of different ways. But no, I think this is probably something that's here to stay. It's probably going to get regulated a little bit, but I think it's probably overall a healthy development.
So Nancy, as an investor, does this influx of retail investors through Robinhood and other means, is it changing your business at all? Is it changing the markets?
I mean, I do think everyone is able to access financial markets. And I think it just goes to show how financial literacy, no matter what your field is, whether you're, in any industry, whether it's finance or whether you're, whatever field, everybody has savings and everybody needs to know how to invest their money. And I think especially being a woman investor in this rather male-dominated industry, I think it's a good thing. I think it's a healthy thing that investors are being focused on, and I don't think retail investors are not knowledgeable investors. I think retail investors can be very, very powerful, and we really saw that democratization happen. And I think the amazing thing is with technology, you can have access to so many different ways to learn about markets and so many different avenues. And I think it's a real positive thing that generally most people are getting interested in their savings and what to do with their money.
So Ken, you mentioned a bubble with respect to GameStop and maybe some of the meme stocks. When you say bubble this week, you have to think about Bitcoin. It ended up somewhere north of $55,000 now. What is going on with Bitcoin? And is that a situation where people need protection?
Well, first of all, I mean, clearly some very, investors with big reputations on Wall Street, Elon Musk, have very, vocally gone in, and that's really generated a lot of support for Bitcoin. At the end of the day, there's sort of a question of what is it? What can you do with it? There's certainly a lot of, there's some transactions where people are getting their money out of places with big capital controls and war-torn states, and it's being used for that. But I think in the long run, it's going to get regulated a lot more. Maybe it has some very influential people behind it to try to stop that. They won't succeed. Every central bank in the world's focused on this, and it's not going to really come into the mainstream in terms of transactions ever. The central banks won't allow that. It just doesn't have the transparency.
So Nancy, you're an investor, at least I think of you as an investor, not a trader, much less a speculator. Is it really something you can invest in, Bitcoin, as a practical matter? What are you investing in? To pick up on Ken's point, what are the fundamentals of Bitcoin? I don't know what they are.
I do not invest in Bitcoin personally. I manage the Quadratic Interest Rate and Volatility Inflation ETF. I think if people are buying Bitcoin because they're worried about inflation or, the dollar losing value, there are definitely other tools that they can look at. So I really don't have, I do kind of agree with Ken that it does seem a little bit like a bubble. I don't really get why it's up, especially when you look at other cryptocurrencies. Why is that one doing so much better than the others? It does seem confusing.
So Ken, you've done a fair amount of studying, I think, and some writing on Bitcoin. When we talk about democratization, we tend to think of Bitcoin as well, that's a way to get away from the governments and stuff. But I have read that, in fact, there's a relative handful of these miners, many of whom are located in Belarus and Russia and China, who are doing this. How democratized is Bitcoin?
Well, I wouldn't want to underplay it in the way it's being used. But the thing is, the idea that you can get around the use of the dollar, by the way, a lot of Bitcoin trades, a lot of the way when it gets out of a place with capital controls or avoiding a war-torn territory, it actually involves cash trading for Bitcoin. But at the end of the day, we've had all kinds of innovations from the private sector over the years. The private sector invented coinage, probably. It certainly invented paper currency. Over the years, the government eventually regulates and appropriates. they're not going to allow a lot of transactions to take place they can't see, so they can't collect taxes, they can't enforce laws, et cetera. So I think over the long run, central banks are looking, they're all working on their own digital currencies, that's coming. But the idea that it would be Bitcoin, to Nancy's point about what's special about it, I don't know either. It seems like it could produce a clone. On the other hand, it's proven very robust. I don't know if it's almost like a form of modern art that, in the year 2100, you'll go to a Star Trek convention and buy a signed Leonard Nimoy poster with Bitcoin or something. I'm just not quite sure, where it's going to be in 50 years.
That's an idea. Just briefly, Ken, the governments might not like it, but can they stop it as a practical matter?
Well, they can't stop two people anonymously trading, but if they want to go, convert it into a purchase other than illegal arms or something the government's not tracking anyway, of course the government can. The governments can crack down, as China has, on how much you can use it in retail stores, how banks can take it. The governments have enormous power. There will be a market in war-torn states, and if somehow things get really horrible everywhere, it could be, something that comes up. I sometimes describe it as a bet on dystopia. But yes, governments, as long as they have power, have quite a bit of means in order to prevent it from being used in ways they don't want.
Nancy, to wrap this up, and I'm afraid it's going to have to be very brief, is this a result of too much money sloshing around, just too much liquidity?
I don't think there's too much liquidity. It's really about where the liquidity is going. It seems like there is obviously a ton of liquidity, but there are still a lot of businesses, small businesses, people that are suffering from the effects of the pandemic. And so I think it's not necessarily, it's just directing it, as Ken pointed out. We have to get the money to small businesses.